Hello and welcome to Bringing Education Home. I'm Herb.
And I'm Christina. And together we bring you experts and ideas to help grow healthy, happy, successful families that are both inside
and outside the box. If you like the show, be sure to follow Christina on Facebook.
And please leave us a like review on your favorite podcast platform.
Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Irene Daria. Irene is a developmental psychologist specializing in teaching children how to read. She has taught reading to the children of celebrities such as Kate Winslet and to hundreds of other children and has trained teachers in the science of reading. She is the author of the new book, I Didn't Believe Him, an intimate look at how schools turned millions of kids into struggling readers and of steps to reading, a series of workbooks that enable anyone to teach a child to read. A passionate literacy advocate, she lives with her husband in Manhattan and Amagansett, New York, and is the proud mother of two sons whom you will meet as young children in I Didn't Believe Him. Welcome today, Daria or Irene. It is a pleasure to have you here. I'm really interested in listening to this because my wife is a lover of teaching children how to read. It was one of her favorite things to do as a teacher. So I'm really looking forward to hearing two reading specialists talk and then jumping in once in a while with my own little thoughts. So welcome. Great. Thank you for being here today. It is a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it was amazing when we did our pre-podcast chat. We talked a little bit about, what you experienced and everything. And I told you a little bit about my reading experience as a teacher as well. And I want to find out more about you because you're coming from a different angle, the developmental psychologist and things like that. And I was in the trenches as a teacher. So this is going to be a great conversation. I hope parents really pay attention to what the signs are to look for. If your child's struggling, if your child is having issues, when to really kind of perk up those ears and find out what can I do to help my child get past that. So thank you for joining us.
Sure.
So jump in there and tell us a little bit about your book that you wrote and why it created this passion to get the reading kind of under control and teach other people how to teach kids how to read.
So the book is called I Didn't Believe Him, and it uses my son's story, our family story, as a window to how schools have turned millions of kids into struggling readers. And just a little bit about the book. It's about quite a serious subject, but early reviews have come in and they're calling it entertaining and informative, horrifying and inspiring. And teachers, Christina, you will relate to this. One teacher who reviewed the book said it's horrifying because she saw herself as the teacher in the book. She saw herself using those methods to teach reading. And now that she is aware of the science of reading and how reading should be taught, it's horrifying to her that she, did that, but also inspiring because of how I was just a mom. I was not a developmental psychologist when this happened to my son. And just a mom, I put in quotes because moms and dads out there, you are way more than just moms.
I was going to say that. It's like, how dare you say just a mom? Right, that is.
You're your kid's number one, you're the number one knower of your child, and you are the number one person who can be the gatekeeper for how things go for your child. And so, Christina, as you were saying, it's so important to know, when things are going wrong and why things might be going wrong, and really how easy it is to fix it. I really want to stress that. There's this myth about reading. It's amazing now that I have lived through, and I'll tell you about the experience, but now that I have lived through the experience that I write about and I didn't believe them, it's amazing to me that we as parents, most parents do not know how children learn to read. We have no clue. We send them off to school and, thank you, school, I hope you do we just assume the school will do a great job because how hard can it be? Right? We're reading, most people, well, actually, it isn't true that most people read, but we believe that most people read well. And so I'm a huge proponent in every parent not necessarily teaching their children to read because it may not be necessary. There are schools out there that are doing a great job, but there are schools out there that really are not, through no fault of their own, doing a great job. Teachers have been trained in their colleges of education to teach reading in this incorrect method, and they are fully well-intentioned. They fully believe they're doing the right thing. And when some of them now are realizing they're doing the wrong thing, they're horrified. They're as horrified as parents are when they learn, what happened. And then, so the book has my son's story as a window to what has happened to millions of children. And then interspersed with our story is the history of reading instruction in our country and how it developed from the late 1800s to the 1920s. Fascinating stories of good intentions gone wrong. It's just fascinating and amazing and really almost unbelievable. I was going to almost call the book Unbelievable, because it's unbelievable that many schools are teaching reading this way. So what schools are doing.
We're not teaching reading that way.
Right.
And what I was going to say is, with my 27 years of experience, hindsight is 2020, right? Because I was able to kind of get into teaching reading before a lot of this was put into place. And then I lived through that time as a teacher. And, I just kind of innately knew, is like, that doesn't work completely. We need to do other things. And then coming out the other side after we figured out that people figured out, oh yeah, this isn't working. And there's still some schools doing it. Yeah, exactly. Hindsight is 2020. And I'm really hoping this does shed a light to more teachers and more school districts.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what's happening in many schools is research has definitively shown and proven that over and over and over again. That's the importance of scientific studies, that they're well designed and that they can be replicated, so that what happens in one study happens in another study, happens in a third study. So you're sure it wasn't just a fluke, or the kids that you had in your study. You're really looking at what works. And the way reading is taught in our country has swung back and forth as a pendulum since the 1920s, really. It's been back and forth between teaching phonics, which is teaching children how to sound out every letter in the word and string those sounds together to read words. And phonics research has shown, should be taught explicitly. You need to teach the child phonics. They shouldn't discover it on their own, which schools are having some kids do. And you need to go step by step. You need to start from the earliest short vowel words like cat and hat, and then move on to something called blends, which are words like clap and stop, which have two consonants at the beginning or end that are sounded out. Then something called digraphs, which are CH and SH words. And then long vowels like and then you review, and a child progresses systematically and learns how to sound out longer and longer words. So that's one method of teaching. That is the correct method of teaching. That is the effective method of teaching. That is the method of teaching that if you teach every child on this earth who is healthy and capable of learning how to read, they will learn how to read. And the other method has been called various names and has gone through various incarnations. It used to be called look-say in the 1920s with Dick and Jane. Then it was called whole language. And then Why Johnny Can't Read came out, saying our kids are not reading. It's because schools are teaching reading all wrong. Whole language changed its name to something called balanced literacy, which said we're teaching whole language and phonics. We're giving the best of both worlds. And I'll explain whole language in a second. I know I haven't explained it yet. And balanced literacy is what has remained in most classrooms today, not the systematic teaching of phonics, but balanced literacy. So what balanced literacy is based on is the idea that learning to read is as natural as learning how to speak. When we were babies, no one had us fill out, yeah, you're shaking your head, I know. Yeah, it isn't, it is not, but it's based on the idea that, I love the expression on your face. It's like, it's horrifying, right? Okay.
Yeah, what she's mentioning, for those people who are just listening, it was Herb's face as she was explaining. He was like shaking his head. No, like, no, that's not accurate. And I'm sitting here as a teacher going,
that can't be.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I saw.
So I'm not a teacher. I've watched her, but just the idea, just even the sound of that is like, no, that's not even,
wait,
even a little bit right.
It gets worse. It gets worse. So there's the idea that learning to read is as natural as learning to speak. And if you just surround children with books that they are motivated to read, and if you read to them, and you sprinkle in just enough phonics, like as it comes up in a story. Maybe you'll teach, oh, when there's an E at the end of a word like cane, the E is silent and the A makes its long sound, or it says its alphabet name. That's how teachers usually introduce it to children. And then that's it. So often parents would go to teachers and say, my child doesn't know how to read long vowels. And the teacher's response would be, oh, your child was absent that day. Well, one day, right? Christina's shaking her head. Yes.
I'm shaking my head going, no, that's not true.
And that would be that one lesson. And if the child didn't learn it, well, so be it. And so it was. Many children didn't learn it. Kids were not learning how to read. And so let me go back. I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but I am going to say children weren't learning how to read, because it's important that we circle back to this. And the child was blamed for it. It was something. Often schools would begin saying your child isn't learning to read. Something must be wrong with your child. And I'm going to give away a major plot point in the story, and I didn't believe him, but I think it's an important, I hope your viewers will and listeners will pick up the book, because it really is fun. Like someone called it a beach read. It's a page turner, like, oh my God, what's going to happen next? But the plot of the story is this. Oh, actually, hold on. I'm jumping the gun much too much. So let me go back and explain a little bit more about balanced literacy. Instead of teaching, and I'm going to make a note of what I want to return to. I'm sorry.
That's okay. We kind of interjected and got you going off on a different tangent, just because, yeah, that's why I'm so passionate about this. Reading is so important. And like you said, people who just say to parents, oh, well, they'll just pick it up when it's time. It's like, no, there's so much more to it. And it's not that parents don't want to do their best and they don't, they just don't know. And that doesn't mean that they can't be their child's reading teacher. It just means that they need to educate themselves and understand as they're learning and teaching their kids.
Exactly. So going back to explain how balanced literacy has been teaching children to read, it uses a method known as 3 cueing. And kids are taught to look for 3 cues or clues as they read to help them figure out what words can be. So they're told to guess what the words can be by looking at the picture. They're told to use context clues. Is the story about a ranch? So if there's a picture of a horse, could this word that begins with an H be the word horse? If Herb, you're going to shake your head in disbelief about this one. If the child read the word pony instead of horse, that will be accepted as correct, because it fit into the context of the story and had quote unquote meaning. And children are told to look just at the first letter of a word, not to sound out the whole word, but just the first letter. And to encourage children to guess, and the stories that go hand in hand with this method of teaching, they're called pattern books. The same little sentence is repeated on every page. So like, a house is a home, there'll be a picture of a house. A teepee is a home, there'd be a picture of a teepee. An apartment building is a home, there'd be a picture of an apartment building. No beginning reader can read the word apartment building, but they're supposed to guess what it is from the picture. To encourage guessing from the picture, teachers would often cover up those big words with Post-its, so the children could not even see the word. But that's how much they wanted. Herb's looking at Christina like, is she
You don't
really
look at a
telling the
word,
truth?
how do you read it?
Exactly. Thank you very much. So this is how they have been teaching our children how to read. And how this came about is an even wackier story, because what happened was, in the beginning, when in the history of our country, parents taught children to read at home, pretty much, right? And then schools were established. The schools were established. They were called public schools, but families had to pay to send their children to them. A lot of families couldn't afford to do that. They continued to teach their children at home. Those who could, the kids who went to those schools, they were pretty joyless places. There was drilling, there was rote repetition, they were sitting on hard slabs, there were dunce caps, it was strict, it was not fun. And
I say they're still pretty not very thrilling.
In some places.
In some places. Well, you know what? That was the appeal of balanced literacy. Those classrooms were full of joy, unless you were one of those children who couldn't read. The teachers were reading lovely stories to the children. They were sitting on the rug. They were picking stories that they wanted to, instead of at desks and rows, there was freedom. It was child directed and joyful, but ineffective, unfortunately.
The only one of those concepts that actually made sense to me was the where you look at the picture and kind of, or the context is the context, because there are certain words like wind and wind that are spelled the exact same way, and you have to use the context to know whether it's wind or wind. And so when you said context, it's like, okay, that makes sense. But then the way you described it later, it's like, well, that's a lot deeper of a concept that most kids who are trying to understand a word wouldn't necessarily be able to get either.
Exactly.
And I'm kind of a weird one. I kind of don't remember learning to read, but I was really, really good at it. And at a young age, I was very much an avid reader, reading books way above my level and trying to piece together words myself. So a lot of the learning how to read, I don't really understand that much, because for me, it did come kind of naturally. My mom read to us all the time, and I would like read over her shoulder as she was reading the words. And eventually I just realized that I could read.
That's great.
You were one of the lucky ones.
Yeah, you were wired. Everything in like humanity, in our species, it's on a continuum, and some kids are here, some kids are, it's very difficult for them to learn how to read. Other kids, they're just born wired, and most kids are somewhere in the middle, so yeah. Yeah. But going back to the story of how this came to be, Horace Mann is the father of public education in our country, and he went to one of those joyless schools, and he had such good intentions. He wanted to he established public schools in our country. He set up the first school of teacher education in our country. So what he believed really, really was important. And he had a position, I need to remember what it is. It's in the book, and I just don't remember right now his exact title, but he had a position with the state of Massachusetts. He left that position and took a significant pay cut to become the Secretary of Education in Massachusetts, and was tasked with setting up schools in the state. To do so, he and his bride spent their honeymoon in Europe visiting schools and seeing how schools taught and how they taught reading. And that's where he was exposed to this natural way of teaching in Germany. And it seemed to work. Now, seemed to work, I have to say, educators have to be really careful when something seems to work, because no one looks at the elephant in the room, which is our parents teaching their children at home. What is happening at home that this is seeming to work? Is it working in the classroom because of the teacher? Or is the child coming because of knowledge the child has previously from home, or the parents are supplementing with tutoring or with what they're doing at home? Because I have many friends whose children are in school in Germany and were taught in this natural way, and I can tell you those kids were tutored. It did not work in Germany, and it didn't work here either. But Horace Mann didn't know this. He came back and he became a big proponent of this method of teaching. It was put in briefly into schools in Boston, but then the principals of the schools wrote a blistering attack on it because they were seeing it didn't work. So it was pulled out of the schools again. But Horace Mann, as I mentioned, he set up those colleges of education. And that's from that time forward, we're talking the late 1800s, that method of teaching was taught in colleges of education, that you teach children the way a deaf child will learn to read. You show the word, you show the picture, and they make the association. It was believed to be quicker. It was, phonics was believed to be painful. Well, if your teacher was there, with a ruler and, making you recite, phonics could be painful, but phonics is a lot of fun when it's, when kids are learning. So anyway, it didn't go anywhere far in the late 1800s, but in the 1920s, the progressive era came, and a lot of change happened in our country, including change in education. And these reformers, a lot of them were at the University of Chicago, they wanted to change and make schools, all children now needed to go to school. They wanted to make learning enjoyable for children. Again, the best of intentions. And they put into the schools a method of teaching called look-say. Herb, you're going to shake your head again at this one. The look-say method, which used the Dick and Jane stories as its readers, did not even mention the fact that the alphabet existed. Teachers were not allowed to say that letters existed. Children were taught to memorize whole words as if they were ideographs of pictures, like the Chinese language does. And they spent the entire school year learning this tiny bank of words that appeared in the Dick and Jane readers, doing things like dancing the waltz. An entire reading lesson was spent dancing a waltz, or pretending they were skating, because Dick in the story was on roller skates. The word skate didn't even appear in the story, but they were roller skating to bring meaning to these words so that they would remember them. It was a short word, it was a long word. In one story, the words in the story were, oh, look, Jane, look. And it was one of the Dick and Jane siblings was walking in her mother's shoes that were too big and almost fell in a puddle. So for another reading lesson, the kids had to imitate how they would walk in shoes that were too big. This was how reading was taught. Okay. And it was just a total disaster. And a professor who, he may have been at the University of Chicago, I'm not sure, his name was Edward Dolch, who was a big proponent, by the way, of this method of teaching, realized, oh, we have a big problem. Kids who are taught in this way, the way the Dick and Jane readers teach, could read only the words in the Dick and Jane books. They couldn't read anything else. So that's how this Dolch sight word list that probably every teacher on this planet has been having her students memorize came to be. Dr. Dolch made a list of the 220 most commonly used words in the English language and said to teachers, have your kids memorize these words because they show up more often in stories than, oh, look, Jane, funny, Sally, right? Those are not common words.
Right.
So from the 1920s through the 1950s, kids were taught to read this way. Samuel Orton, who co-created the Orton-Gillingham method of teaching reading, he was the very first person in our country to realize that schools were turning kids into dyslexics. And he wrote an article about this, saying this, called the sight word method of teaching as a source of learning disability. It was published. He said that this method not only will not help children, it will cause children to struggle with reading. He was completely ignored by the educational establishment. And he went on to create the Orton-Gillingham method of teaching reading to help these children that were being harmed by this method of teaching.
And that was up until 1950?
It was up until 1950, but so what happened in the 50s? What happened in the 1950s? I think 1954, 56, something like that. Rudolf Fleisch wrote the book, Why Johnny Can't Read. And he was the first layperson's journalist to publicly say, our schools are teaching reading all wrong. Fabulous, amazing book. And he detailed exactly what was going on with this curriculum. I don't want to, I mean, I feel like I should be a little more humble putting myself in the same league with that book, but it's as horrifying. His book is as horrifying as my book, and my book is like about the later era. But
so that's only 70 years ago. So 70 years ago, people were setting up their children to not be able to read. Because some of the statistics that we kind of talk about is that in the United States, I think it's less than 50% of our population right now can read above a 6th grade level. And our graduating seniors, it's like only 40% can read above a 6th grade level. So our reading comprehension in this nation is just absolutely horrible. And
been happening
if
for a long
right now,
time.
the 70 years ago, if that was the main way children were taught, then that's 3 generations of people who don't have fundamental reading skills that wouldn't then be able to teach their children the right way to read. So
Exactly.
yeah, those are absolutely horrifying statistics and numbers and dates. It's like that is awful.
Yeah. And it's interesting. We don't have time to get into all of this, but again, this is all in the book. The
Yeah.
whole reason Dr. Seuss books exist is because an article was written in Life magazine in the 1950s saying exactly what you just said. In the 1950s, how you know, our kids can't read and what's wrong, and parents don't understand, and they're going on to college and they need remedial classes. And someone in that article suggested maybe the problem is that the Dick and Jane books are so boring, and someone like Dr. Seuss should write fun stories for children. And Dr. Seuss was commissioned to write stories using these 220 sight words, and that's how his books came to be. Cat in the Hat took him a year to write. One, because it's not so easy to do what he was tasked with doing, but two, he was a big phonics proponent. This went against his grain. This was like, oh my God, what am I going to be doing to these children? So that's what I mean by the history is fascinating, how things developed. But so yeah, so 1950s, where Johnny Can't Read comes out, the big uproar in our country, we need phonics, just like it's happening now. Now nationwide, there is a growing, ever-growing awareness of the need for phonics, and many states have passed bills saying that reading needs to be, what, Christina, sorry?
Oh, that the states are requiring that phonics be
Are
taught.
requiring. Actually, Pennsylvania just shot that down. They said, no, we are not putting the science of reading into our classroom. We don't have the money in the state budget. That came out last month. They're not doing it. But yes, in 4 states, it is actually illegal, against the law, to teach 3Qing the way Eric was taught and the way many kids are currently being taught. So there's great change happening in some places and no change happening in other places. So that's, you know, why parents need to be aware.
Yeah.
But so what happened? There was this big change, right? There appeared like there was going to be a move towards phonics.
Mhm.
And then another professor named Kenneth Goodman published an article about a little study that he had done. And I put the word study in quotation marks because it really was not a valid study in any way, shape, or form. But he had observed struggling readers read, right? The key word there is struggling readers. He said he observed readers read. And he noticed that these readers who were unable to read well, I have to really stress, they were not good readers. They did 3 things. Herb, can you guess what they were?
Look at the pictures.
Yes. They
Look at the first letter.
Yes.
Try to figure out from other words around it.
Exactly. Those were the 3 strategies that they used.
Uh-huh.
So nowhere did this professor stop to think these children were taught using the look-say method. These children did not know how to sound out words. These children were struggling readers. He didn't say, oh no, these poor children. What did he say? He said, this is how all children must be taught to read, because this is what children do naturally. They look at the pictures, they look at the first letter of a word, and they look at context. And our educational establishment, did everybody drink the Kool-Aid? Like, how in the world could this have happened? The entire education, sorry, Christina, what?
Oh, for those people who are not watching on video, Herb's eyes just did the whole shift back and forth and the shake of the head.
Well, I also don't want to go into the whole conspiracy theory about the dumbing down of America and how a lot of this is actually kind of intentional. And so the shadow people who wanted, because you know, an educated population can't be controlled. So, you know, if you can read well, then you can inform yourself and it's harder to control you. So there's a whole lot of, it would be great. I would love it if stupidity could erase the conspiracy theory there. But some of these things and the way they've come about, it's like, there's no way that that can just be coincidental. So in a way, to me, sometimes it feels like that is an attack on the American people, brought on sometimes by the progressivism that was introduced during those times. It's like, so
Well,
so
totally.
yeah, so
It's
this is the outside of the box part of our podcast. She's inside of the box, I'm outside of the box. I would love it if ignorance is the only reason, but sometimes the way these things come about, it seems so obvious that it can't be accidental.
And through all of that, I was kind of laughing because I lived this story that she's telling. I was in the classroom fighting against this stuff all the time. Oh, here's our new greatest curriculum. You're going to teach it like this. And I would stand there in my classroom and look at the curriculum and say, that doesn't make sense.
I remember
the kids cannot be doing that. So I wouldn't throw away the old books that I knew how to teach with. I wouldn't throw away the phonics. I wouldn't throw away the ones that were really, really helpful to kids.
I remember going into the basement of her school to drag out her old curriculums when she was trying to teach us other stuff, because she goes, this isn't working. We need to get my stuff out. And we went down to the basement and found all of the old stuff that she knew worked and brought it back up into her classrooms. So her kids totally were able to read.
Lucky students.
Many
They
of
were
them.
so lucky to have you. That's wonderful that you did that.
Now a few words about vibrant family education.
How many entrepreneurs and business owners start out on this journey to make a better life for their family, only to find that it took so much more time and effort than they were expecting that they had even less time for their family? I know I did.
At Vibrant Family Education, we want to help you reach your family goals while you're still building towards your business goals. We do this by bringing you the third leg of the stool to keep your family upright, family education development.
By bringing your children's education home, you will be able to model your work ethic and family values as you overcome obstacles and challenges to build your business. Instead of learning facts to pass tests, your children can be watching and seeing the dedication it takes to build your business and the legacy you want to create for their future. They will be able to witness the struggles and joys, the wins and the losses, and learn from you how to persevere and grow in life.
Instead of waiting until you get successful to spend more time with your family, start with the end goal in mind and bring your family home. Instead of trying to repair your family after you reach success, let us help you start achieving your family goals from the outset. Learn to be successful with your family now, and no matter what happens in the future, they will be better prepared for life, especially after watching how you cared for and built not only a business, but a healthy, happy, and successful family.
We offer a wide range of educational services, including how to easily get started with homeschooling. Come visit us at vibrantfamilyeducation.com and let us show you how. And now back to our guest.
And other teachers did too. But at the same time, Kenneth Goodman, when there was a push, so his method of teaching was called whole language. Just quickly zipping through the rest of the history. Whole language went into schools in the late 1960s, early 70s. Stayed until the year 2000. That's when Congress, and in the meantime, there were all these reading wars going on, right? Like, we need phonics, we need, whole language. Everything was based on belief. And the Congress finally said, all right, enough is enough. Whole language was put into place in California. In the 1990s, California had been towards the top in reading scores. Whole language was put into place. It fell to rock bottom. Only the territory of Guam was worse after whole language was put in California. And there was enough fuss being made that Congress said, okay, let's figure this out. Let's try to put an end to these reading wars. Let's see what we can do. It convened a panel called the National Reading Panel of various experts and had them review all the studies that they could find that were valid on how to teach reading effectively. They reviewed over 100,000 studies, took them a long time, and they came up with what to this day remain as the 5 effective pillars of reading instruction. Those are phonemic awareness, knowing the sounds, the ability to hear the sounds in spoken words, phonics, knowing how to sound out words on a page, vocabulary, knowing what the words that you're reading mean, comprehension, knowing enough about the world so you can understand when there's a story about cowboys. Well, who were cowboys? Having knowledge of the world, and fluency, reading as if you're speaking. So you're stopping at the right place with periods.
Like your program.
What? Sorry?
Oh, Christina has a reading program that she helps parents teach people to read. And those are the 5 core things that are in her program. And it's like, oh yeah. So as you were going, she had her hand down here going, okay, that one, that one. And then, yeah. And I even recognize those because I've heard her talk about it so often.
So those were, identified as the 5 components. And again, we had the swing, right? It's phonics, whole language, phonics, whole language, in the 20s and the 50s, in the 70s, and then again in 2000. It looked like phonics was coming in, and President Bush was putting in No Child Left Behind, and he was instituting, he was going to take away federal funding from any school that did not use a phonics program. And New York, where we live, was ready to walk away from that money. That's how committed they were to the other way of teaching. A whole language then, right, began, people, just like with Johnny Can't Read and Look Say, parents were saying, well, this is crazy. Parents were saying, well, this is crazy with whole language because it was in the news. So, and that's when balanced literacy came to be. Whole language basically renamed itself. It didn't disappear. It took on a new title. And whole language used to not believe in phonics at all. Like one of the founders of whole language, Frank Smith, said, meet the enemy, it's phonics, and balanced literacy at least would sprinkle phonics in a little bit. And parents didn't know it was just being sprinkled in. Parents thought their kids were being taught phonics. And they were told that your kids now have the best of both worlds. And balanced literacy, yeah, so it's a really sad story. It is heartbreaking to a child and to that child's family when a child doesn't learn to read in school. I can tell you this was my story with Eric, and the book is called I Didn't Believe Him because my son, okay, Herb, you don't want it to be stupidity, but like listen to this, how a 5-year-old was wiser than his teacher. He came home from school at the beginning of kindergarten, my 5-year-old son, and said to me, Mommy, my school isn't teaching me how to read. They tell us to look at the pictures and guess what the words are. And that's not reading, Mommy. How do you read? And like a fool, I said, you go to a really good school, honey. They really know what they're doing. Trust them. They will teach you how to read. I was in awe of the school because in New York City, some kids go to their zoned local public school, and there are also schools that are more rigorous and known for their high academics that you apply to. And we applied to the school. We didn't prep Eric. I didn't know any of this nonsense was going on. We just sent him. He was tested and he got in. And I was in awe of the school. Wow, my kid goes to this fabulous school. Yeah. And I told him to trust his school, even though the school had given us a presentation on how they taught reading, which was cover up the words, don't sound out the words with your child. And I had no idea what they were talking about. I still trusted them. And his kindergarten year, the pain that children feel when they want to learn and they are not being taught, I can't begin to tell you. He began not wanting to go to school. He'd been a little chatterbox in preschool, and I was sure that all I would hear from the teacher is he talks too much to his neighbors and he's always going to get in trouble for, yakking. He moved from sitting in the front of the classroom and having his hand up and talking all the time to sitting in the back of the room in silence, bowing his head in shame. I remember I came in once during open school week when they let parents come and see, and it happened to be a reading lesson, and the teacher happened to be reading Mrs. Wishy-Washy. In goes the whatever, wishy-washy, wishy-washy. And the kids, all the other kids seemed to be reading with the teacher. She was pointing to this big book with a pointer. I didn't know, and my son didn't know, that those kids, most of those kids weren't reading either. they had just memorized memorized the pattern, and they were reciting it, but Eric thought they were all reading. So he's in the back of the room trying not to be noticed so that no one would notice that he couldn't read, began having terrible nightmares that he was drowning. One night he shrieked so loud, I really thought he had fallen out of his bunk bed and broken a leg or something. He dreamed that he was lost forever. It brings tears to my eyes to this day, lost forever, because he wasn't learning to read in school, and he thought he would be lost forever because he's lost not just in reading, right? But words come up in math and just
yep. His whole academics were impacted by not being able to do this thing that he cared so much about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think this is part of why I wrote the book. I really feel like we narrowly escaped a train wreck only because of my little boy. If he had not finally gotten through to me, yeah, I would have continued to trust his school, and he would have been labeled learning disabled, which, by the way, happened anyway. We have to get to that. We have to get to that part of the story because it's unbelievable. Yeah. I'm not kidding. I hate to say you have to read the book, but you got to read this book.
I'm going to have to read the book.
It's an unbelievable story, and it's happened to millions of children.
But tell us how he actually proved it to you finally, because we did this before on the pre-chat. What did he do?
So what he did, I know most of your people are listening, he took a book, he held it behind his back, and so he came home in first grade. Mommy, you want to see how I read? I'll show you how I read. Now, imagine the thought that went into this, into what he then did. He put a book behind his back, one of those little pattern books, and quote unquote read it, turning the page. I don't know if you can hear that page turning in the back, turning the page at exactly the right time for each sentence. So it was that pattern book that I mentioned earlier, A House is a Home. So he quote unquote read, a house is a home, turned the page behind his back. A teepee is a home, turned the page behind his back. An apartment building is a home, turned the page behind his back. And that's when I finally realized he had memorized every little story that his teacher gave him. That's why he in kindergarten got great grades in reading, because everybody thought he was reading because he'd memorized all the lines in the story. So this little 6-year-old boy, who I think didn't even know the word memorize, didn't understand, certainly didn't know the word 3Qing, didn't know what was happening, didn't know he should have been being taught phonics because he didn't know what phonics was. He didn't know what it meant to sound out. He just knew this was wrong. He knew he could not read those printed words on the page. And he finally got through to me. Had he not gotten through to me, I can't imagine what would have happened, because for his entire schooling, would have believed the school that something was wrong. And that's what started happening. I began teaching him to read at home. At home with me, he made great progress. I finally got sick and tired of this, honestly, and went to the school and very politely said, you know, you guys really should help me with this because it doesn't seem right that I'm teaching him to read at home. Can you please give him some phonics in the classroom? It would be very helpful. Not in the classroom, but they referred him to a reading specialist who worked with him twice. After only 2 lessons, I get a phone call from her that she wants to evaluate him because, so she actually, her reasoning for this was not yet that she thought something was wrong, because she was very aware that kids should be taught phonics, and she was very aware that kids were not being taught phonics in the classroom. But she said, if we don't put him in the pipeline for an evaluation, we can only work with him for 6 weeks. And 6 weeks is not enough time for us to work with him. So put him in the pipeline, and if everything's fine, when it comes time for the evaluation and you don't want it, we don't have to do it. So I said, okay, put him in the pipeline, but I never signed the papers because I thought this is absurd. I am not going to let these people evaluate my child when there's nothing wrong with him, because what to watch out for, parents, is if your child makes progress, then there's a very high probability there's no problem. It's when a child does not make progress and continues to struggle. That's when you start thinking, could something else be going on? Should we take a look at what, and might there be a certain, learning difference or learning issue? That's when you want to have your child evaluated. But so he's making great progress with me at home. In school, he's not making progress because the way they let kids move on to the next level of books is, in his classroom anyway, they need to have read one book from a publisher called Rigby, which published these little pattern books. And if he could read this one book, if he could correctly guess the big words from the picture, he would be allowed to move to the next level. And I guess he was a bad guesser from the picture because he could read all the books he was bringing home because his teacher had read them to him in the classroom. So he knew what those words said. Yeah. On his own, with an unfamiliar book, the kid couldn't read a word like astronaut, right? If it's an astronaut in the picture, or dinosaur, if it's a dinosaur in the picture. So he was not making progress in school. And the more I went to them saying, please give him phonics, the more they said, please let us evaluate him. Something is wrong. It was bad. It was like a tennis match.
Yes.
Every time I asked for phonics, I got back, something's wrong with Eric. Let's evaluate him. And my husband said, you know something? We have to let them evaluate him because it's the only way we're going to prove to the school that nothing is wrong with him. Can you imagine? To subject your child to an evaluation just so you can prove to the school that nothing is wrong. So I said, And then Eric did this fluky thing where he wrote some words backwards on a easel. He was writing words, and I thought, that's really weird. And he didn't realize he wrote them backwards. And I thought, and I didn't know that this was still normal at this age, that this is something called mirror writing, that the brain is still flexible, that you can go from left to right, right to left. Yep. I thought, wow, maybe something is wrong. And I was so worried about that I decided, let them evaluate him. Because if he's doing this and he doesn't realize this is not the way we write in the English language, Hebrew goes right to left, but not English. So they evaluated him. The evaluation comes back. We're in a meeting with the whole team, and I'm so nervous because I'm thinking, they went out of their way to find something wrong. No way are they going to say it was them and not me. Oh, evil, 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 right? Or concern about evil, evil, even though these people were so nice. So like, oh, you're like really hurting my child. His evaluation came back stupendous. He scored high average or superior in every single category, including phonemic awareness. They thought maybe he had an issue with phonemic awareness. Oh my God. I, at the time, didn't realize phonemic awareness is not a disorder. I didn't realize phonemic awareness is something they should have been teaching him. They were telling me maybe his problem is with phonemic awareness. Scored great in phonemic awareness.
Even though they didn't teach it to him, it's still his problem. Yeah, no, that's not the way it works.
Right, exactly. So I stand up ready to leave thinking, wow, they didn't go out of their way to find something wrong. Look at them, they're saying the problem is us and not Eric. We have such a happy ending here. The principal says to me, so we're labeling Eric learning disabled. It was like someone punched all the air went out of me, and I sat down and I said, what?
What?
And she said, we're labeling him learning disabled because, now the evaluation also found that the kid had a high IQ, right?
Right, yeah.
We're labeling him learning disabled because his reading level does not match his high IQ.
Yes. And for parents who don't understand that, in the school system, the discrepancy between the two is what causes the label to happen.
Yep.
That's what causes the label to happen, the discrepancy. So if they're really high IQ, or they can really figure things out well, but they aren't learning the way you think they should be learning, or they aren't catching up with the rest of the class, it's that discrepancy.
Yep.
Yeah.
So because there was that discrepancy between his high IQ and the reading level, they were going to label him. And I was ready to fight this tooth and nail, right? And then they said, well, now they knew, but at this point, Eric was reading. I have to say this. His reading level didn't match his high IQ, but they were all aware that Eric could read Little Bear and Poppleton. He could really, really read. he was a reader. There was nothing wrong with reading with this kid, but he needed help with writing and spelling. And I hate, and it upsets me to this day, but I let them label him learning disabled because they said they would work with him on writing and spelling.
Uh-huh.
And I had spent a year working with my son on reading, and I didn't want to spend the next year working with him on writing and spelling. And I thought, okay, these teachers are now aware that the problem was them and not Eric.
Nope.
Maybe they will work with him on writing and spelling, right?
Yes.
Second grade came around. We now have a different learning specialist in the school who's working with Eric on writing and spelling.
Yeah.
Parents, if your child is referred to services, don't just ask questions. Don't assume that everything's perfect, because this learning specialist taught the way the school did. The first one that Eric had taught phonics, taught systematic phonics. This one, she gave no lessons. There was no explicit teaching of anything. All she did was she would take his writing and correct any words that were misspelled and have him fix them. And he would get so upset. He loved to write. You know, he needed work on spelling, but he loved the process of writing. He loved math. And we went to the school and said, she's not allowed to work with him anymore. She's causing more harm than good. And to make a very long story short, I worked with Eric again in his second grade. And by the end of second grade, he was decertified. That label was removed. Everything was fine. And he went on to become such a stellar student. He won awards in his elementary school. He was accepted to the Johns Hopkins University Program for Talented Youth, salutatorian of his high school, perfect score on the ACT, all 5s on his AP exams. I am not bragging when I say this. I say this because none of this would have been possible if I hadn't taught him to read. Imagine, if you can't read, you can't get 5s on your AP exams, right? You turn off to school, you start hating school, you start not wanting to go. We narrowly escaped such a train wreck because my kid figured out that he needed to hold a book behind his back to get me to finally hear him.
And I'd like to jump in here real quick and let you know that her son was very fortunate. He had a mom who cared enough to do the hard work to help him learn how to read. He was also very fortunate that he was a high IQ and he was a natural learner. You could tell that from the story by the way he was figuring things out, right? But if that child, if he had been more of an average child, it might not have turned out this way. Or if he was a child who was struggling, right, and didn't have the help and couldn't get the other help that he needs, even if his parents tried, maybe they were a little bit lower IQ or a little bit different disability, they would have never made it. And those are the kids who drop out. Those are the kids who end up in gangs. Those are the kids who end up, not having a fulfilling life. So parents, listen to this story, please, and really, really pay attention. If something's going on, follow that mama bear gut instinct, follow up, carry on, read books like this that can really make a difference for our children so that we don't have these kids who are not confident and who are not happy, healthy, and successful. Sorry, I just had to say it. It's just like, I'm sitting here going,
I'm sitting here nodding.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
So academics wasn't my problem. It was actually probably more of a curse for me because I was a high IQ, but I grew up in a really small town out in the middle of nowhere. And so I had a really rough time in school, but it wasn't because of academics. It was because of how people treated me because of how quickly I learned. And so I didn't want to go to school because of how I was treated, not because of learning difficulties. And so sometimes kids don't want to go to school for other reasons, and pay attention to those as well. Because, absolutely. So,
So then how are you helping now? So we've gotten through this awesome story on the seat, cliffhanger, cliff edge. It's like, what about now? What about now? So what are you doing to help parents now? And what are some, maybe 2 things that you want all parents to know to please watch out for, to do for their child?
I think every parent should know how to teach a child to read. That is what main focus. So I after this happened with Eric, I went back to school and I became a developmental psychologist. I did my dissertation on how children learn to read, and I now own a tutoring company in New York called Steps Tutoring, which we tutor all grades, but really our function is, yes, we tutor when kids have trouble in school, but it's to teach the basics and make sure the fundamentals are in place with the little ones, which is where my heart lies. So I wrote a series of books called Steps to Reading. I don't know, I'm holding this up. I don't know for anyone who's watching it on video. The workbooks are called Steps to Reading. And they are books that any parent, any teacher, and any paraprofessional any babysitter, it doesn't have to be the parent. It can be the babysitter. It can be the older brother, older sister, can use to teach a child to read. It takes you step by step through the most important phonics rules. It includes the most frequently used sight words also, like the is the most frequently used word in our language. So it's the first sight word that kids learn to read. You don't need a teacher's manual. The instructions are on every page. And so the book has worksheets. It has games, it has bingo games, it has board games that kids can play with each of the phonics rules as they're going. It tells you which decodable readers they can read at each step. That's very important. Decodable readers are stories that can be sounded out. So it's important that children not just learn the phonics rules, but they can apply them to stories that they are reading. So the books tell you exactly which stories children can read at that point. Some of them have stories in them that kids can read. They have computer games that kids can play. So really, it's a one-stop shop. That's a lot of fun and useful. And I'm very excited because I haven't done really. I would say I've done, I guess, no marketing with that. I use them with my tutoring sessions, but I haven't done any big marketing push at all. And I spoke at a homeschooling convention in Pennsylvania, and through being there, this major company called Rainbow Resources just picked up the workbook. So that's like a wonderful stamp of approval, really excited that the books will be beginning to be distributed and make their way out into the world. But I wrote them.
I have kind of a question here. So about your workbook. So if less than half of the people in the United States can currently read at a 6th grade level, can they get through this book and be able to teach their children to read when they're not proficient at it?
Not only will they get through it, but studies have found that if you take people who are at this level and you teach them phonics, they become better. So not only can they do this with their children, they will become better readers. I've actually had a friend of mine volunteers at a prison in Ann Arbor, Michigan, a low security prison. And he gave the book to a prisoner there because a lot of people are in prison because they can't read. They turn to all sorts of other things. And she was close to tears. And a fellow prisoner who had also low skills, but not as low as hers, was working with her. So it benefits both. It has a tremendous benefit to both. So the answer is a resounding yes, absolutely. Because the words are small, cat, hat, right? And you practice that and you realize when you have a word like, trying to think of a good example. This is not a good example, but misinformation, except for the shun at the end. If you know those little words, all of a sudden you can sound out those syllables in longer words. So absolutely, they can do it.
And so that goes to one of the things that we are so passionate about here at Vibrant Family Education is that the parents who want to maybe even pull their children out and take them to homeschool. They're concerned because maybe they weren't strong in academics, or they weren't strong in what they needed to know to get through school successfully. And what we try to help them understand is that you can learn along with your child. And if you can't do it, then you know how to get the resources around it as well. So doing what's best for your child in reading, doing what's best for your child in education, even if it means, you have to take them away from the public school system, you can do it with programs like Irene's, with people to support like Vibrant Family Education. And we don't have to leave our children in these bad situations where they're getting their confidence crushed every single day.
Yeah, we've heard I wasn't good at school. How can I teach my children? And it's like, well, with these programs, you actually can start filling in the holes that you missed and get better yourself. Mm-hmm. And it's a hard thing to say to someone who is out there and making life work with a really low reading level. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's heartbreaking, but also fulfilling once they actually start getting it and start moving ahead.
Yep.
Absolutely. Awesome. So we want to make sure that parents are hearing some of the biggest things, takeaways from this. And one of them, I believe we both agree with very much, is listen to your gut instincts. If your child is coming home and saying something about school is not working for me, it's not fitting right, I'm not learning what I think I need to be learning, please check it out. Please make sure that you are being your child's advocate. I think the second part of that is reading is so important. It's that springboard to everything else. Even math nowadays, they have these big story problems in math, right? And if they can't read, they're going to feel bad at doing math as well. So please, please, please do everything you can to make sure your child is reading.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Irene, can you give our audience, as we're wrapping up, the website or where they can contact you for more information?
Absolutely.
And then also last words.
Sure. So my website is stepstoreading.com. And that has information on I Didn't Believe Them. It has information on the workbooks. It has information about me. It has a lot of free resources that you can download and print and use. There is a video, How to Teach a Child to Read, that if you watch it, it will walk you step by step through exactly what to do. You'll feel very empowered, I think, after watching the video. So that's where I would. So stepstoreading.com. Feel free to email me with any questions. I'm happy to help. And last words is I'm happy to help. There was a TV show called New Amsterdam. I don't know if you know it. The doctor would walk around and say, "How can I help?" That's how I feel. I'm very aware that the children who come to me or to us at Steps Tutoring for tutoring are really lucky that their parents, have recognized, it's good to supplement what's happening in school, because it's not 100%. It's not what it should be, even though most of these kids go to quote unquote, excellent schools. I realize that I'm helping such a small proportion of people, and I Didn't Believe Them takes you behind the scenes of my family's life. There are a lot of personal vignettes and stories. You'll see how we were affected, how stress affected our marriage, and how we had this silly fight. And I actually once was so stressed that I forgot my older son's name, but it took so much out of me to figure out how to teach Eric to read. That's part of the story. I didn't have Steps to Reading, and I wrote Steps to Reading because how I wish I had had those workbooks. How I wish I could have just gone to one place, gone to Amazon, ordered it, it would have been delivered, and I could have just followed that curriculum and not have spent a year of my life literally researching and trying to figure out what to do, how to teach them, what do I do, and am I doing it right? And so the resources are out there now for parents in a way they were not when Eric was in kindergarten. So parents really, trust yourselves. I mean, this is not rocket science. This is teaching beginning reading and beginning math, because there are issues with math too in many places, and grammar. Kids are not taught grammar. And often schools say, oh, trust us, we teach it our way. No. Just teach them how to add, teach them how to subtract, teach them how to spell, cat and flat, and teach them those fundamentals, because I fully believe first grade is the make it or break it year for kids in school.
Yep.
That's where they develop their identity, their perception of themselves as students. And if you can help, your kids in first grade, which really any parent who speaks English and can read at a fourth grade level can do.
Absolutely.
Do it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much for sharing your story and the information. I mean, because a lot of people have, they've heard about this reading debate and this reading war, and they didn't understand what it was all about. So by listening to you, I bet they have a greater understanding. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Pleasure.
Yep. And I'd like to thank you as well, because you have a story and you found a problem. And so many people today complain about problems without actually doing anything about it. And you not only did something about it for your family, you went out there to create something to help other people so that they wouldn't have to go through it. So you went out into the darkness and you got information and you brought it back to share with the people. That is a hero's journey. That is such a wonderful thing that you were doing. So thank you for bringing this out to people. Thank you for fighting those dragons and coming back with the help to help other people. You are a hero, and I really, really appreciate you for who you are and what you've done.
Herb, I'm going to, after you post this podcast, that actually brought tears to my eyes, because you don't know how much that meant to me. And because I continue to blame myself that I didn't recognize it sooner. So thank you. That's a very positive way of looking at it. And I hope that one day I will look at it in that positive way. And I will. But I still see myself as, I'm the mom that didn't listen. But thank you. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And you're totally worth it. It is so true. Because again, there are so many other parents in this situation who aren't listening still. And you did something, and that's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, audience and guests, we have come to the end of another show. I hope you have enjoyed it. I hope you've gotten some wonderful value out of this. And please make sure that you take all those gold nuggets that we have dropped along the way, and don't just carry them with you, but take them out and use them each and every day to build happy, healthy, and successful kids. Bye for now.
Bye for now, everybody.
Hello, and welcome to Bringing Education Home. I'm Herb.
And I'm Christina. And together we bring you experts